Something I love about wrestling is that it creates this ability to look at a character, look at a person, and especially as a younger person, see yourself in that character. There are different personalities, different expressions, different stories, different presentations, different body types, different colors that represent the person, different pyro, different theme music, different styles of wrestling, different, they're grapplers or they're brawlers. There's high flyers, there's agile people, there's more ground and pound. It's like there are different types of characters that someone can go to a show and resonate with. When I took my kids to a wrestling show, I think it was early last year, they had so much fun, first of all. And it created this situation where my stepson in particular was really excited to basically try on every single character that came out. Every character that came out, he saw that they were doing some sort of like symbol or gesture or hand movement, and he just tried them on. And he just liked it, and he just kept sort of almost like putting on outfits to see what fit him. And I thought that was just like incredibly fascinating to watch. And I recognized in myself the ability to do that when I was a kid. I would do that with video game characters. I'd do that with even like people on TV shows and movies. And there's this exploration that happens of like, what do I resonate with? I mean, that comes through sports too. And the Olympics, you see someone who's performing at a high level and you're like, wow, I want to be like that person. Or, there's there's something about the soul that resonates with an archetype or an energy, and you just want to aspire to that. And so it's this interesting exploration that we go through as kids, or at least I think we should go through as kids to see what's possible for us and then kind of choose and try on these different characters to see who we want to become. In a lot of ways, this is represented through the earlier gods and goddess archetypes: Egyptian gods, Greek gods, the Mayan gods, like all these different types of nature gods and power gods, particularly power gods I'm referring to, that manifest today in things like wrestling and things like the Olympics. And I would even dare say politics nowadays, that they represent these energies that people aspire to, for better or worse. you know some sort of resonance, something about that person that is almost like a larger than life version of myself or who I'd like to try to be. And it may not be that person in its entirety. It may just be their look. It may be the way that they speak, the way that they stand, the way that they walk, the way they present themselves. And that leads to the Jungian concept of persona. And we're often trying to choose and look at avatars to basically become a persona. So becoming an avatar is essentially like connecting ourselves to the person that we are, or the idea or the character that we're resonating with. So it's like you see a big strong dude come out in wrestling and you're immediately mimicking his movements. You're almost like a mirror, and you're like trying to be like that, right? Whether or not that matches up to your actual physicality, to what you're actually capable of, that's work to be done later to reconcile, what we connect ourselves to related to who we expected ourselves to be. And a lot of the ways during this time period, we're developing who we expect ourselves to be, whether we want to become a big strong boy or a very nurturing feminine woman, if you go the traditional route. But in this day and age, it's so much more nuanced and complex than anything that's ever been documented before, especially because being a man doesn't necessarily mean, or a breadwinner, quote unquote, a male breadwinner specifically, doesn't necessarily mean going out and chopping wood and building a log cabin and doing all the Teddy Roosevelt stuff. uh, but it may mean more of being a software engineer and having the endurance to sit in front of the computer and use your mind, and uh, perhaps have much more considered traditionally feminine qualities in terms of your personal relationships. Maybe not being so ruggedly masculine in terms of your look, but your persona may be of a Silicon Valley developer, which in the 2000s and early 2010s were basically just wearing jeans and a hoodie. That was the look. And, it even is still a lot of that today is just like black t-shirt, black chinos and black sneakers. It's a pretty specific persona that someone aspires to, and then they use that to like plant the seeds for what kind of job they want to pursue and what kind of person they want to be. The challenge becomes when that persona is something that gets used for all things. Like it's a hammer and all the world's a nail. So if you want to become a wrestler and you take a wrestler attitude to literally everything in your life, like you might have trouble with your relationships. You might have trouble with going to the DMV and not being able to uh, not being able to be a little less intimidating in a situation that doesn't require as much intimidation, right? So the flexibility of persona comes later through doing all sorts of what's called shadow work. Now, there's this diagram with Jung's perception of self, where self is in the middle. Above the self, you've got the ego, and then you've got persona, and then the outer world. So persona is the interface between ourselves and the outer world, and then the ego is the interface between ourself and the persona. The ego, I almost treat it as this filter. It's this way of saying, like, these are the things I want to keep in order to look the way I want to look, to fit in the way I want to fit in, to get the job I want to get the kind of partner I want to get. All the things that I'm going to filter out is going to filter through the ego. The ego is going to protect that. And then the persona is going to display what I want it to display. And then on the other side, below the self, is the shadow, which is everything that gets filtered from the ego down into the shadow. It's the part of the inner self that we know is still there, but is not being presented to the outside world. And then below that is the anima or animus, which is like really the animating force. That's the anima is like the root word of animation. And it's really about soul. Anima means soul, and animus means spirit. And they're really just the key animating forces that that make us alive, that make us a human being. And then the inner world is much more collective unconscious. It's much more it's a much bigger thing that having an animated force, having a soul, protects us from the complicated, timeless, boundless inner world that can feel treacherous if we fully submit to it. So it traditionally, anima and animus, the soul, is typically referred to as the opposite of the persona. The persona is, again, oftentimes, in the past in particular, there have been these more masculine and feminine direct relationships with persona. Men want to be men, women want to be women, right? That kind of thing. Today, not only just politically and socially, it's much more nuanced and complex than that in terms of personas and how people are presenting themselves. But generally speaking, at all, there's just so much more of a diversity of jobs, of ways of expression, of ways of being, that it's not as clear cut as that anymore. So I do like to look at the anima or animus as just the soul. It's the defining force of what continues to drive us despite what is not being shown, right? So when we start to do this work in all these different areas to maybe loosen up the ego and not filter so heavily, to re-examine things that are in our shadow, to be able to say, like, actually, this is safe now to be this. I can be more flexible. I can be more feminine than I used to think I needed to be, or I could be more masculine than I think I used to not think I could be, that I could set more boundaries, or I could be more open and be more willing to be vulnerable. That opens up more of our animating force. The more that we have this wide channel of a connection between the self and all these different other places, we're able to bring the soul in more and be more conscious of that, and allow for our full self to really have flexibility, right? And it's the challenge here is that when we're younger, we need to do all this filtering. It needs to be rigid for a while. It needs to be something where we develop a persona. And the opposite of the avatars that I'm talking about in the persona are these archetypes that exist within the soul. If you develop an archetype of yourself, if you develop an avatar related to being a CrossFit athlete, your opposite, or your what's kind of being filtered through the soul, kind of creates this opposite structure so that it doesn't just dissipate, right? You don't just dissipate into the ether of the universe or into the unconscious. That there's still a structure in there. There's still something to communicate with, to say, don't abandon yourself. There's still other parts of you here that need to be witnessed. That is very valuable, especially in cases where, let's say, in a feminine sense, you have a very feminine persona. And I see feminine, masculine in terms of energies. If you have a more feminine persona, and you know you present yourself as that, and you present yourself as sort of vulnerable in terms of physical strength or not setting boundaries or anything like that, when someone maybe comes to verbally or physically attack you, that animating force is able to kick in and say, uh-uh, if you allow it, if you're not so rigid in your ego and your shadow, you are allowing that animated force to wake up and support you and say, we need to protect ourselves here. We need to run, or we need to fight back, or we need to do something that betrays the persona that we've created for ourselves. We need to do something that betrays who we think we are. If you are a person who's being attacked and you're not willing to tap into that maybe more violent part of yourself that you've decided is not healthy, that you don't want to bring out, maybe that's just anger in general, then and continue to push that down while you're being attacked, then you're most likely going to end up in some sort of serious injury or worse. But if you allow and have the ability for that animating force to come forward, then you may be willing and able to protect yourself in that moment. The same goes for the opposite. If you're so rigid in terms of masculine energy, like both the feminine and masculine are usually given this sense of, like, feminine is more like open and diffuse, and masculine is more rigid. I think they can both be rigid. It's really about the rigidness of the persona, right? So if the rigidness of femininity is being gentle and not willing to tap into the opposing side of assertiveness or violence or angry when necessary, then that's rigid. And the same thing is true if a man is being overly masculine, whatever that means for whatever the culture is, and is not willing to soften up to connect with their partner or to deliver news, like difficult news, to somebody in an elegant way, or to connect with teammates or coworkers or anything like that, to build rapport and to tap into a part of themselves that maybe seems more vulnerable, then that's rigidness if you're not able to do that. So it's a willingness over time to expand the sense of self, to have the ego not necessarily be a protective force, but a partner. And the same thing with the shadow. The shadow is a partner. It's a connecting bridge between the persona and the soul. And as those elements get more connected, which they can get connected through a lot of work of being honest with ourselves, of doing what's typically called shadow work, but really it's just having honest interfaces with our internal self, and then wondering how that is betraying our external self. Like, if is the external self and the internal self not necessarily matching up completely, but is it matching up in a way that is as full as possible, right? Like, if you have internal violent tendencies, is that being channeled into something, or does that need to be uh if you have the what I should say is, Like the shadow is not as clear cut as saying, like, if you are projecting onto murderers and killers that you don't like that you are also a killer inside. That's not what that means. But conceptually, it could be that you kill someone's dreams, or you kill someone's ideas all the time, or you kill your own momentum. Uh, there's something about these violent acts, whether it's physical or subtle, that perhaps live in the shadow and need to find ways to come out, to own it, and then to say, actually, this is something that I've done in the past, not to enable it, but to accept it and say, this is a tendency that I have, and I'm going to notice, and I'm going to try to not do that automatically. But there's a reason that I've done that, and it's a self-protective mechanism, or something like that. That's what therapy's for. That's the whole process. I think I found this really interesting in general, this idea of avatars and archetypes, as something to consider as a part of our big picture work, because when we get later in life, if we had not had sufficient exploration of avatars in the past, like I grew up knowing a lot of people who just like rejected sports and rejected religion and rejected all these things that would create the opportunity for avatars to be explored, for us to be able to see what our highest potential self could be, and are ending up defaulting to politicians now. People who are representing power. Power is a major repression, I think, in our culture. And power is often seen as overly aggressive, when power is more about respect. Power is really about uh, uh, there's a certain joyfulness to being able to utilize power, and power has this big shadow of being assumed to be violent or aggressive or abusive, or um, abuses of power, right? But it's abuses of power. Power is not abusive. It's abuse of power, which is like taking advantage of a position. And so a lot of people have repressed that, and it's become this archetype that they sort of connect with, is this someone they see in the political sphere who is aiming for giving power back to the people, and then the archetype is like really excited. It's an animating force inside the self that's a deep repression that people are really excited to be able to experience. It's like also when you meet a person, the anima animus is also like this kind of relating force. So when you experience an energy in another person that represents something that you repress in yourself, it can either be triggering or it can be really exciting. It can be something that leads to limerence, which means like this sort of enamored relationship with this person, this golden shadow in a way, because you're not just repressing bad stuff. It's not just repressing violence or fear or whatever, but you can also repress a part of yourself that is like something. You could repress joy. You could repress, uh, assertiveness in terms of power. Power can be a positive golden shadow of something that is deemed to be bad when it's actually like good for people to step into leadership. It's very good for people to step into taking responsibility and to claiming their expertise, or claiming like how they can support forward motion in a project or an idea, right? So this golden shadow can be illuminated in someone that represents this massive ideal. It could be like the type of person that you think you should be, and they just excite you. They animate you. They get your soul moving, and through that process, there's usually this ability to then hopefully see that there is a distinction between you and them eventually, and that this thing that's being reflected in the other person exists within you as well. That's why you get excited about it. It's this like force within that's just like, oh, finally, yay, we're allowed to do this, or we're allowed to see this reflected. And by seeing it reflected, then we can get the opportunity uh, to awaken it a little bit more. It's almost like this person gives me permission to be this, and then there's like this elation, there's this joy, that can come through. But it can also just be a temporary high. And often with something like limerence, it's this fusion, right? And the avatar feeling can be somewhat of a fusion. When you see the wrestler coming out and you're like, it's not necessarily that like I want to be that person. It's like you embody that. And that's what happens in limerence. It's like you're not necessarily seeing this person you're enamored by or your partner or whoever as a separate person. It's like there's this fusion that happens, this codependence that happens. And I've talked about codependence and the drama triangle, hero, villain, and victim quite a bit on this podcast and on this Substack about that it's this codependence, that it's like someone who represents a hero that's coming to save me, which could be a partner. That's what limerence usually is. Like someone is here to save me. This person who I may form a sexual relationship with is here to save me. They're here to help me. They're here to fill out all of the varying parts of me that I refuse to step into. And that you can see how that easily translates to politics. This person is stepping into power to do stuff that I refuse to do. And they're going to fix my life for me. They're going to be the hero in my life. And that's, I mean, who's more excited than a victim that finds out the hero is here? you know? But it's still a codependent relationship, and that's still a temporary relationship. And so what really happens is if the victim doesn't let go of the need for the hero, for the rescuer, then they're not able to tap into their ability to create and have their own animating life force for themselves, right? As someone who has a very tight persona, and sometimes that persona can be being a victim to reality, that animating force, it just doesn't get a chance to shine if they're perpetuating this victim narrative within themselves. And so being able to tap into this animating force involves letting go of the persona a little bit to tap into these other parts of the self that are that live in the shadow, quote unquote, but really allow for one of my favorite descriptions of shadow, because shadow is always like this paradigm of light and dark, which is, again, it's not about evilness, it's really about light and heavy, I think, where I've heard this description of shadow being this heavy bag that you drag behind you. It's all this stuff that you think you've hidden in the couch cushions, but are still there, right? It's like a kid that shoves the cheeseburger into the back seat pocket. It's out of their sight, and it's not their problem anymore. But it is, because they go back into the car and they smell it, and then they're like, "What's that smell?" It's the burger you put in the pocket, you dummy. Uh, and that's kind of what we do to ourselves. It's the burger we put in the pocket. It's like it's saying, oh, okay, I don't want to be so aggressive. I don't want to overstep my boundaries. I don't want to be a leader here. I don't want people to not like me. I don't want to be overbearing, or I don't want to be, the same things, but like in another direction. Like I don't want to be too emotional. I don't want to be too vulnerable. I don't want to be accessible, setting too many boundaries versus almost setting too little boundaries. Like there's a middle ground with all of this. And so in a lot of ways, this self is not necessarily about accessing self. It's about expanding self. It's self includes the ego, self includes persona, self includes shadow, self includes the animating force. It includes the soul. And when the self expands, then the outer world becomes easier to access, and the inner world also becomes easier to access because there's messages in there. Often the animating force sends us messages through our dreams, and that archetype usually manifests as the opposite gender or some opposite archetype. I don't even think it's the opposite gender necessarily, though it tends to manifest that way if we have a pretty strong relationship to a particular gender as part of our persona, right? So it'll manifest in various dreams and messages of what we've decided to release, especially when the problems we're facing in life cannot be solved by our persona, right? We can't just show up and be a networking salesy business guy in a certain context and it's just not working. We're like, this persona we've cultivated for a long time is just not working anymore. So the shadow and the soul have like messages to say, well, there's a closet full of different outfits that you haven't put on that you can try. And that includes subtle things. I mean, literally, it could be outfits and changing up your look, or changing your hairstyle, or getting new glasses, or something to sort of either include a new look or just change it up entirely, which would kind of be a swap, really. I don't know if that would be the case, but integration is usually the goal, right? So it's like, what else could I be here? What else am I missing? What else could I bring in that could expand my potential, that could expand the possibilities for me to navigate the outer world more effectively? I think that's the work that I'm doing right now. I'm really needing to pull various aspects of myself forward that for a long time I have been beyond this like masculine business bro energy that is like, how do I bring in some of the yin energy into my life? And some of that has been a little bit in the way that I dress. I mean, I have some bolder colors at times. I haven't had the money really to bring in new clothes, but I have an image in my mind or have an idea of how I would like to expand the way that I look. And once I get that going, I feel like I can navigate the outer world a little bit more effectively. And so building a healthy persona is important, right? It's not that the persona is bad and the shadow is good or the soul is good. It's not like you need to like enable all of your darkness. That's what usually gets, I think, misinterpreted, especially by younger people who are interested in Carl Jung's work. Is like they hear this message of like, you need to be a beast, you need to bring out your inner masculine. It's like you may be leaning heavier into this false persona that doesn't actually fit you, and it's hurting you more than it's helping you. You may be repressing the feminine, which you might need more often, and people experience that. So as much as we think we're presenting something to the outer world, they can still see that shadow. I've heard so many times that like people perceive me more uh, as pretty emotional when I don't think I look at myself that way. I think of myself as pretty stoic and have that more masculine energy. And so me owning that and saying like, no, I have a lot of emotionality, I have a lot of expression, I have a lot of raw irrational energy to bring into the world. And by rational, I don't mean less than rational, I mean beyond rational. It's like there's just so much information about our experience that is beyond facts and figures and data and numbers, that is valid and valuable to our experience. And that's why I try to bring to this podcast, to try to bring a mix of what is emotionally going on for me, what can I share here that is within reason, and what could I share in a data sense that's within reason, in a philosophical sense, and how to express myself and how to share ideas and how to bring all this forward in a way that represents a fuller sense of self. But I do think the thing that's really missing for me is showing up as a persona. I've done it on YouTube, but I think showing up in person, I'm having maybe a little bit of embarrassment because how I show up now feels like an old version of myself when I physically show up to a place. I haven't really taken the chance to do some shopping, which I need to earn some income to do that, right? Which you can contribute to if you'd like to become a member here on Substack, dopamine.substack.com, DOPEAMINE.substack.com. And you can contribute to my wardrobe and allow me to get some new pieces that feel more aligned with myself. But there have been a couple things. Like I got this cardigan. It's like this orange cardigan that I wear in the fall and winter that feels a little bit more aligned with bringing maybe the spiritual side of myself in. And then I just got this shirt, this green shirt that goes over my t-shirts that feels a little different than what I'm used to wearing. It feels a little more stylish. It's got a little bit more flow to it. my stepson said, "Oh, you look taller." It was like, yeah, there's a little bit more confidence in there, right? And so I'm wanting to bring clothes in that represent more of that fullness of what I feel I truly am, and not who I feel like I'm supposed to be. In a lot of ways, our persona is representative of who we feel like we're supposed to be for a long time. And then what gets repressed is stuff that we need to pull back in and say, like, nope, I'm out of this context now. I don't need to be so modest religiously in terms of the way that I dress. Sometimes we pendulum swing and end up, creating a flip flop persona and saying, like, well, forget all of this. I'm just going to be completely lewd and again enable the shadow. That's not what this is. It's not a role reversal. It's not a complete flip. It's transcend and include. It's like, well, this has been my story. This is who I've been a part of. What can I keep and what can I get rid of? And that's really the difference, is agency. It's choice. It's the self is in control. The ego is not in control. The ego is just a mechanism, and it's a support mechanism. Ego is not something to kill. Ego is not something to get rid of. The ego is something that is serving the self as a filter. You don't get rid of the filter, because then you get more poison that comes in. The filter is important, but for a long time, the filter is doing too much, and we need the filter to back off. And then the shadow comes in and becomes a filter on the other side that allows for soul to come through. And as our soul comes through, which may not mesh well with certain aspects of society, may not mesh well with the beliefs you grew up with that you might need to loosen up with or let go of, or even some of the beliefs of who you thought you were supposed to be when you looked at those avatars when you were younger. The soul of who you are may be just a completely different thing. And discovering that is a precious and wonderful process that I think the main difference here, and the work that I've been doing lately, the past few episodes in particular, is that all of this work, if it's laced in judgment, is going to be incredibly harrowing. If this work is giving yourself grace and giving yourself opportunity to approach it slowly and carefully, one bit at a time, not forcing yourself, not creating manufactured urgency around it about having to be something completely different in all one fell swoop, but just saying, oh, that's interesting, and approaching yourself with curiosity is going to be an absolute game changer when you do this kind of work. But if I were to contribute to the big picture of how anyone can do this kind of work, that would be it. To approach yourself, to approach the shift in your persona and your relationship to your animating force, and then the ego and the shadow and the self, is to approach it with curiosity and not judgment. My name is Christian Rivera. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you so very much. If you would like to leave some support, you can leave a comment on this post here on Substack, dopamine.substack.com, DOPEAMINE. Let me know what you think. Let me know your story. Let me know if there's anything in this realm that you're working on or anything you kind of resonate with. And then if you would like to support my work ongoing, so that I don't have to do other stuff, I can continue to support in this way, you could become a premium member here on Substack, which is only a few bucks a month, as a great way to support this work and to support me and to support your own journey and going forward. And my hope is to provide discounts and things like that on the premium side. So leave me suggestions for what you would like as part of that. Anyway, I'm not great at endings, so I'm going to wrap this up. I appreciate you. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time on Dopamine. See ya.